So thank you guys, thank you everyone for coming along. This is an ongoing part of our fall series. I think most of you are tuned in to the different talks that we've got throughout the semester. This is our third of 6. Amy's been actually announcing it that our November 8th one is unfortunately canceled, but we will have one next week, November 1st. Andrew Rumbach from the Urban and Regional Planning Group at CU Denver will be here. Today we have the opportunity to have Grant Couch with us. Grant is part of the Citizens Climate Lobby. We've known each other now for a few years around Boulder, and it's been great. Grant's background, a degree from Lehigh's mechanical engineering a little while ago, and then went to Wall Street and worked on Wall Street for some time, and then changed your pace and started to work with some Zen communities. Is that right? I have it written down here.
Zen Peacemakers, yeah.
Zen Peacemakers International. And on the board of that, you're also a Zen teacher of Hakuyu Taizan Maizumi lineage. Did I pronounce that correctly? And has increasingly been getting involved in Citizens Climate Lobby, and as you may have seen from the announcement, coming at it from a conservative caucus perspective. As I said just a few minutes ago, from my view, this is as important as ever a time to be building this kind of a caucus. So you would agree to come along here and share some of your experiences and some of your insights from the work that you're doing. And so we'll give you some time and welcome it up for a discussion from there.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Very much.
I'm going to sit down because I originally thought we were going to be in a lecture hall, but now that it's in this comfortable place, I'm going to sit down so that we're in a conversational mood. And while I'll leave time for questions at the end, I certainly invite anything during the course of the talk if it comes up that you want to ask. So when Max first contacted me last spring to give this talk, what he asked me to do was to talk about my work within Citizens Climate Lobby, but also to talk about the larger context within which I work. And as I thought about it, it seemed to me that making this a personal story would be the most effective way to get to it, even though that's counterintuitive. I thought the personal story would be a nice touch, particularly given that I'm a lifelong fiscal conservative. And so I will necessarily start with let's see, what do I have? Here we go, okay. So I'm necessarily going to start with a personal background. It'll be brief, but I think it hopefully will explain how it is I came to understand the serious nature of the issue and how I decided to engage with it. It's been quite a trip. And as I continue to cycle through climate education and political education, it's an iterative process, and I keep coming back around to the same solution and path that I'll be describing later as, for me, the best way to go forward. And it's through this process that it sort of arose for me to describe how I've become a citizen, an active citizen. I hadn't really thought about that until I really had the opportunity to engage Congress. So, home, born in West Virginia. And I imagine that some of you might look at that and have some aversion or repulsion, but for me, it's a childhood frequent scene. Beautiful fall leaves in the background, coal mining, major employer in West Virginia when I was growing up. Of course, it's also a job that carries with it incredible safety risks and long-term health risks as well, but it's an honorable job. So in West Virginia, I got my first exposure to politics when I'd hear my parents complain about the Democratic machine and the unions controlling the state. So when I was 5, my dad took another job and we moved to New York. No, that's not my high school graduation picture. I went to public schools in New York. I'm curious, does anyone in here not know who this is? So this is Alfred E. Newman. And Alfred E. Newman was the poster child of a magazine called Mad Magazine. And for some reason, Mad Magazine is seared into my memory as a child, even though I never bought it. It was a satire magazine that I think kids loved, but it also carried a lot of interesting messages for adults as well. What's the relevance of talking about Mad Magazine? Well, that's one memory that I had seared in my little brain as a kid. But another one was something called duck and cover. And when we were in school, the fear of a nuclear bomb, wanting to be prepared for that, we were given these duck and cover drills. As little kids, we'd get under our desk and duck, and that would be our protection in case there was a nuclear bomb. What's the relevance? Our answer to that nuclear bomb threat was to create something called mutually assured destruction, also known as MAD. And it cost us a lot of money, and still does cost us a lot of money, to defend against this risk. And risk management is one of the things that I'll be talking about. I think the other thing I want to talk about is that, while I'm still here with what may worry, is for me, the risk of climate impacts, consequences of global warming, are second in terms of their consequences for human suffering and species suffering, are second only to nuclear winter. So I think that's something that we really need to address. Again, I look at it from a risk management perspective. So this was my only education in childhood about the climate, about environment. I just like to throw him up there because Smokey the Bear was one of my favorite guys. So after I got out of high school, I eventually went on to college, and my undergraduate degree is in mechanical engineering. I went to Lehigh, as Max said. And I don't know whether it's a cause or an effect, but as a mechanical engineer, I love these photos. I mean, there's something, to me, beautiful about it. And I think it also reminds me that when I was little and we'd drive back to West Virginia to visit our grandparents and go past the oil refineries and chemical plants in New Jersey, my brother and I from the back seat would go, "Oh, it stinks!" And Dad had a good answer. "Boys, that's the smell of money." I think this picture also helps me remember to point out how much we really owe fossil fuels. And those companies that have extracted that, produced it, distilled it, delivered it, because without fossil fuels to provide the energy to power the Industrial Revolution, we wouldn't have had all of the major benefits that that's provided and improved the well-being of humans around the globe. One last thing while I'm on here, energy. One of the things that I came across when I was looking at global warming, I initially came at it from a typical Boulder perspective. Hey, we got to do something about this. We got to reduce greenhouse gases. But I didn't really fathom that it was a bit of a selfish look, because according to the World Bank, there's over 1 billion people in the world that have no electricity, and another 2 billion people that have very unreliable electricity. And so, one study I saw, I think it was a UN study, said that in terms of planning energy needs going forward, they've been provided for. But there's energy needs for these other areas that don't have any or have very unreliable energy. And what's the appropriate amount that they were given in this forecast? It was enough power to run a 40-watt bulb 4 hours a day. I don't think that's enough. So I think when we address global warming, we need to address this need for just general energy growth across the globe. So after my engineering degree, I stayed on and got an MBA. And I spent the bulk of my career on Wall Street. And in my last job, I had responsibility for scores of traders around the globe. And the daily trading volume that we managed, primarily fixed income, was anywhere between $15 and $20 billion a day. And our overnight positions that we had to manage were 45 to 60 billion. It's big numbers, it's big risk, but that's not a risk that we could ignore. And uncertainty was a constant reality. But that uncertainty was never a reason not to manage the risk. I see this as the same thing that we need to think about with climate. And the risk, we have risks embedded in all we do, and the lens of risk management is how I see much of the world. Why does science have a question mark next to it? imagine that each of you, probably most of you, not all of you, are related to science in one way or another. The question mark there is because science is now an abused, destroyed term when we get into politics. It's not helpful. But I do want to just point out two things. One, I think it's important to note, and I could point this out to my conservative friends, that 2016, as I think each of you know, was the third consecutive year in a row for highest global temperatures, and 17 is looking to be very hot as well. And then I have a little story I want to tell you, a little science story that I want to read to make sure I get exactly right. So the little girl asked her mother, "How did the human race appear?" The mother answered, "God made Adam and Eve, and they had children, and so was all mankind made." 2 days later, the little girl asked her father the same question. The father answered, "Many years ago there were monkeys from which the human race evolved." The confused girl returned to her mother and said, "Mom, how is it possible that you told me the human race was created by God and Dad said they were developed from monkeys?" The mother answered, "Well, dear, it's very simple. I told you about my side of the family and your father told you about his." So that's all I'm going to say about this science as in climate science, the science that's thrown up as a shield and a weapon when many of the conversations start from the left side. And I don't want to say any more about it because most of you probably know far more about it than I do. I love this slide, and Boulder's right there in the middle of it. And it was beautiful when it first came out, and of course this is a much enhanced version from the one that first came out of, I think, Apollo 17. But for some reason, when I retired and left full-time work, climate called me. I don't know why, but it was like, what's all the fuss about? And so I looked at it as an agnostic. I didn't want to presume one thing or another. I really wanted to dive into it. Unfortunately, I came across Max. And through Max, I got months and months and months of scientific and economic papers to go through. And when I get the stack down, now this was in electronic form, but in an analog sense, when I get my stack down to here, he'd throw on some more. So I was never without reading material no matter where I was. And I became convinced that it was a truly serious issue, that global warming is truly a serious issue, and that man is a major cause. I became convinced. And I use the word convinced very purposefully, not believe. I think that a lot of people get confused when I use that believe word. I was convinced. So, what can be done? And it seemed to me that all we had to do, since this was so clear to me, we just had to get the word out. But that was a naive view. And I'll spend time a little later on why that didn't work so well. But before I leave this slide, I want to talk about just the point that that's the Earth, and that, as you all know, is just a planet that's circulating around or orbiting around the sun. And a lot of people want to call this Mother Earth, and I respect that. And a lot of people want to save the Earth, and I understand that perspective. But I think from my perspective, it is going to be just fine whether we do anything about global warming or not. It's going to continue to orbit the sun. What we need to save is our own current sense of humanity and how we survive together and how our lifestyle, basically. So if we're going to do something, what kind of policy should we do? So I want to go through the attributes of what a good policy would be. I think we can all appreciate the first one. The second one I think is critical, that this transition is going to cost more money. Energy is, during the transition, going to cost more. And we need to make sure that we take care of the folks who are less able to pay that cost. But we also need to make sure that we don't hurt the economy, because as some of you know, Roger Pelkey Jr., he's got his iron law. The iron law says if the economy and the environment clash, the economy is always going to win. I'm afraid that's true. I agree with that. But if we can come up with a policy that doesn't hurt the economy, then we get past that. Business friendly in the sense of being transparent and predictable, efficient and effective, and hopefully removing subsidies for your competition. And then the last one is the good old China question. How do we maintain our leadership role, global leadership, without requiring an international agreement, which I think is impossible to get. But if we can get a policy that does all of those things, that would be pretty cool. It would be a free market, all of the above kind of policy, and let American ingenuity solve the problem. So of all the things I read, Hanson's Storms of My Grandchildren was my favorite and really became my Bible. I was really fired up after reading it because it seemed to answer all the questions. And it had an approach that I thought would work on both sides of the aisle. So what's the solution? It's putting a price on CO2. And the putting a price on CO2 helps bring in that negative externality, a term that most of you may know. The problem with fossil fuels is, as beneficial as they are, is they're not priced properly. And so we can forgive people for using far more than they might otherwise if it were priced with the external consequences of greenhouse gases embedded in it. So put a price on CO2, and that's something that economists on the left and right all agree is the most transparent and fairest way to deal with it. And revenue neutral just means that when you put the price on carbon, there's going to be money raised. We want to make sure that that money, I say, if it's going to be bipartisan, we want to make sure that money doesn't just grow the government. So you don't want to grow the government. There's two recognized ways to make it revenue neutral. One is to reduce income taxes or reduce some taxes, or you give the money back to American households as a regular dividend. So this is the preference I have. It's the dividend policy. And it's true when you compare the two different revenue neutral methods, that is reducing income taxes or paying dividends, that reducing income taxes actually helps the economy even more than handing out dividends to American households. But with American household dividends, you get a offset to the regressive nature of higher energy costs, and you get something that taxes doesn't do as well, which is you buy a constituency that wants to keep it. It'll be more durable that way. So this is where I'm going to shift a little bit into Citizens Climate Lobby and give you the details of their policy, which is very similar to Hanson's, but more detailed. So starts at $10 a ton. It goes up every year. The benefit of this is everyone sees it, and as a business person, you can plan on what it's going to be. You don't have to worry about whether or not markets are going to change the number on you, and it's embedded in every single product. All the revenues are distributed to American households. And this is critical, this last point. This is what makes the rest of the world fall in line, is what we export that has embedded CO2 pricing in it, going to a country that doesn't have comparable CO2 pricing, they get a refund, a rebate. And for those imports coming from countries that don't have a comparable price on carbon, we will charge a tariff. So what are the economic impacts of such a plan? Reduce emissions, which of course is goal number one. GDP goes up, jobs go up, and the benefits of the dividend protect 70%. Studies show anywhere from 60 to 90%, depending on how you look at it, but it protects American households that are less able to deal with high energy costs. Protects as in giving them a dividend that's equal to or greater than the amount of the embedded costs, additional costs they'll be paying for all the products they'd be buying. Pardon?
Just consider.
Thank you. There you go. I'm trying to. Okay, so, so now I have a path. I mean, now I have a plan. You know, an idea that works. So what can this one guy do about it? Which was the second question I had at the beginning. Was okay, what can be done? Something I can do. And so what's really cool is I found this group, Citizens Climate Lobby, that's just now 10 years old. And And I got engaged with them 4.5 years ago, and at that time, they were getting excited about reaching 5,000 members. We're now 85,000 members. And CCL teaches people how to lobby, teaches people how to go into a member of Congress office or meet with staff, talk about things that they can appreciate, and teaches them that there are no enemies, so that it's a true nonpartisan approach that works on establishing a relationship and doesn't point fingers and doesn't place blame. It's just like, this is a problem, I'm concerned about it. And it was also interesting, one of the challenges and what led me to create the Conservative Caucus was when I was in the first conference, there were 375 of us in DC. And one of the speakers interrupted himself to ask this crowd of 375, how many Republicans are in the audience? And only 3 hands went up. But worse than that, the snickers were audible. So I went up to the executive director after the talk and I said, we've got a problem. We need more Republicans in this room. And he said, you're right. Do something about it. So that's what happens when you get engaged with a volunteer organization. So that's how I got involved with that. And it was through the Citizens Climate Lobby that I really understood what it meant to be an engaged citizen. It seems simple. All we had to do was let Congress know that we, their constituents, cared about this issue. And then I started my political education. And I think David French really nails it well here. Sadly, that's our reality. And our political battles have been tribal from the founding of this country. Hamilton and Jefferson's tribes fought each other viciously. But I think we can all agree that today is a low, certainly in our memory, in terms of the political lack of discourse and the partisanship. But why is climate one of the weapons of tribal warfare? I think the answer really comes from the French's statement. It's just that it's used as a rallying cry, as a club for the different tribes to get their teams together to hate the other, to formulate the reasons to protect themselves. And it's, though I also want to take this opportunity to give you some good news, that in my lobbying, and I do go on both sides of the aisle, but I focus on the right side. Despite all we hear in public and all this really horrible stuff that we read in the paper, behind closed doors, they're all very gracious. And I had my hands scratch my head, like, how is it you guys are so gracious about the other side, or someone that you vehemently disagree with in public, behind closed doors? And I think the answer is that they need this to manage their tribe. They make all this loud noise and this horrible stuff outside, but behind closed doors, they're really more civilized than they appear in public. So that's good news. I wish it were different. But that's how they keep their tribes in mind, I think. So when you see this, you're thinking that maybe that I'm comparing Al Gore's movie with Jim Henson's book, and that's not what I'm doing. What I want to point out is the two perceptions are how the packaging results in a lack of success in advancing the conversation about climate change. Al Gore's movie, I didn't realize this when I saw it. I only realized it after I got involved with this and started understanding the political science of this. Is he starts off his movie with, "I used to be the next president of the United States." Now, if you're a Republican, why would you listen to anything else that he has to say? If he really wanted to advance climate, he wouldn't have wrapped all of his little personal political stuff in there. Unfortunate. But what I've learned is it was a very effective way to make it more partisan. I don't think that was his goal, but that's what he accomplished. And Jim Henson, my Bible, I've now since learned that his tagline, "The truth about the coming climate catastrophe and our last chance to save humanity," sounds a bit hysterical. If you're not convinced that this is a real problem, why are you going to continue to listen to someone who's got his hair on fire and waving his hands all over the place? I think what Henson's really wanting to say is humanity as we know it and avoiding the suffering that we're going to cause by not managing this risk. He's still my Bible, but I just am more aware of the packaging challenges. Can you guys all see so I'll read to you. Your mother and I are separating because I want what's best for your country and your mother doesn't. You know, if we listen to our neighbors and family members, if we really can listen, what we'll hear is that people are really espousing opinions that they really think is best for the country. Conflated for sure with their own tribal biases, but this is what they think is best. And so I want to use the next two slides to go into a science that I think actually is easily as important as climate science, in my opinion maybe even more so, and that's political science. So the first one is a paper by Dan Kahane and Donald Berman from the Cultural Cognition Project, and what it outlines here is we see ourselves in one of those quads. This doesn't necessarily align with Republican and Democratic political affiliation. But I want to read from this a little bit, if I may. Experimental research shows that where individuals feel self-affirmed, they are indeed more open to reconsidering their beliefs on culturally contested issues. Cultural orientations condition individuals' beliefs about risk through a set of in-group and out-of-group dynamics. One is cognitive dissonance avoidance. It's comforting to believe that what's noble is also benign and what's base, dangerous. It's not comforting. Indeed, it's psychically disabling to entertain beliefs about what's harmless and what's harmful that force one to renounce commitments and affiliations essential to one's identity. And I would add, in relationship to one's tribe. When faced with conflicting claims and data, individuals usually aren't in a position to determine for themselves how large particular risks really are. Risks like leukemia from contaminated groundwater, domestic attacks by terrorists, transmission of AIDS from casual attack with infected gay men, fill in the blanks. Instead, they must rely on those whom they trust to tell them which risk claims are serious and which specious. The people they trust tend to be the ones who share their worldviews. So if you are poor, but you have a worldview that respects authoritarian kind of leadership, then you get someone in there that's pounding out like that, even though he's making authoritarian claims that are counter to what seems obvious to anyone else, to your self-interest, your worldview trumps that. The second one is a great book. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist at NYU. And Haidt's, I want to look at the time, Haidt recognizes and puts in more of a 21st century scientific outline what Hume said so many years ago, which reason is and ought only be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to be any other office than to serve and obey them. That is, we use reason to support the decisions that our emotions have already made, to support the decisions that our tribe has already said we need to be comfortable with, that make sense from our worldview. And he goes on to describe that there are 6 fundamental building blocks for all of us, but that how much dependence we put on those 6 different building blocks, very different between liberals and conservatives. No surprise. But they're all the same. We all have aspects of them, but they're much more dependent on some than others. So I'm going through the bad news on politics, the challenges of politics. I think I just want to point out real quickly that it hasn't always been this way. Reagan did the Montreal Protocol for ozone layer. Nixon was the one that started the EPA. And one of our residents here in Boulder now, Claudine Schneider, has actually moved here from Boulder, but she was a member of Congress for 10 years and had a bipartisan climate act in 1989 with over 100 bipartisan co-sponsors. It was an omnibus bill, and many of the things in it were passed, but nothing that really directly addressed greenhouse gases. So as our current political reality, I think we're all aware of the loud. I just want to give you some good news on the quiet side. One, there's a Republican-led group, so George Shultz and Baker and others, McEnroe, have something called the Climate Leadership Council. They also have a dividend, revenue-neutral dividend kind of price on carbon model, similar to Citizens Climate Lobby. There's a bipartisan House Climate Solutions Caucus. In the last Congress, when Obama was in the White House, this is something the Citizens Climate Lobby has been the primary driver of. We got very excited when we got to 24 members, that is 12 Republicans and 12 Democrats, who stepped out from behind closed doors and said, we've got to do something. This Congress, we're now up to 60, so we have 30 House Republicans who stepped out and said, climate's an issue and we need to deal with it. And it's a caucus that's actually working on different bills, and they have been effective in little skirmishes in Congress in terms of defending against some amendments that would have been detrimental. They got a lot of work to do for sure. There's also a Republican House resolution with 20 members that says global warming is an issue and we need to address it. It's going to affect Americans. Defense Secretary Mattis and Tillerson have both been in the past come out against doing something about it. They recognize climate's an issue, global warming is an issue, and that it's a risk. But here's a fundamental problem that everybody has to deal with. And I want to point out, anybody here lobby? What I can tell you about lobbying, when you walk the Hill, and you're in DC, whether it's one of the Senate buildings or one of the House buildings, you have a scheduled time, 10:30. When you and your group is going in at 10:30, another group's coming out. And when you leave at 11, another group's going in on the day when they're receiving constituents or, citizen lobbyists. My point is that all day long, they're getting all kinds of requests for things from constituents. And they've got limited bandwidth. They've got limited political capital. They've got limited time. Where do they put their effort? When something like this shows up, and it's not even in the top 5 for Democrats, it's kind of hard to get excited about it. Why would you spend your time on this when there's so many other things ahead of it? Oh, sorry, I didn't do this. So here's Gallup. And there's environment, which of course is a broader term than just climate change. It can include national parks and things that people can feel good about without really caring about climate change. There's also a more recent one. This was 2014. Things haven't changed that much, but Pew has this one. And environment isn't even in the top 10. It's number 13. So, why, if you're a congressman, are you going to spend too much time on this? I mean, it's a question. May not be soon enough, but they're coming. So here's 2 slides done by, I want you to notice the source, the College Republican National Committee. So they're recognizing that it's an issue, promoting clean energy. What do they want out of a political party? They're actually say doing something about climate. So this is important. Helpful, but maybe not soon enough, but possible. So science or risk management. So science is a term that, as I mentioned earlier, for climate is difficult for many people. It can be difficult for everybody. It's not accepted, but there's also the science of politics. There's what do we know for sure? We don't know anything for sure, but we do know that, or I think we know, we have a big risk. And it's going to be very costly. And if we have a solution that doesn't cost anything, in a macro sense, it seems to me to be irresponsible not to deal with it. And I like to paraphrase Vice President Cheney's 1% doctrine. If there's only, and I'm going to put in catastrophic global warming for weapons of mass destruction, okay? If there's only a 1% chance of catastrophic global warming, we have to treat it as a certainty in terms of our response. It's not about our analysis, it's about our response. So you guys know bell curves. So I just had to throw this one in there because in Wall Street we used to talk about fat tails. And my most recent experience at the end in Wall Street was in mortgages. I think we all knew what happened in 2008. That was what economists would call a black swan or a fat tail. I don't know how fat the tail is going to be for global warming or how bad the black swan might be, but we should protect against it. So back to what me worry. Now I don't worry about it. I mean, it is what it is, but I'm going to do what I can every day to do something about it. And I'm happy that I found a path that I think might work. So for me, that we have a risk management solution. Doesn't hurt the economy. It should be acceptable to both sides of the aisle. And I have a lot of respect for what a good economy can do for the welfare of everybody. And it's, to me, a relief to know that we don't have to trade off between the economy and climate. We can actually use the economy to save the environment as opposed to have them compete with each other. And so, lastly, this is just a little pitch for Citizens Climate Lobby. It's clearly a marathon, it's not a sprint, but as long as I'm able, oh shoot, there you go. I'm used to having the same control. It's clearly a marathon, not a sprint, but as long as I'm able to do something, I'm going to, and until I find something else that I think would be more effective, I'm going to keep putting my work here. But I'm always open to another path and another proposal. So, open it to questions.
Thank you very much. Amy, if you just let us know if there's any online questions. Otherwise, if you're comfortable with them, just taking questions.
Yes, sure.
I can start by, I think you provide a very hopeful picture here. Physical realities are not always swayed by economics. Scott Pruitt in March saying that carbon dioxide is not a primary contributor to climate change. Kathleen Hartnett-White coming into the CEQ now talking about it being CO2 not being a dangerous gas, it's harmless. That seems to bring up ideological dimensions of this. I haven't really touched on that so much. Can you talk about that, particularly as you navigate through this space in the Conservative caucus?
So this comes back to, I think, using climate as a tribal control weapon. I just saw today that it's more about, I can't keep track of all the secretaries anymore, but the one responsible for energy, it's energy resilient, it's strong, yeah, it's energy, not climate. And recently we eliminated climate completely. Yeah, that's a reality. And that's part of the loud noise I talked about. And I can't do anything about that. What we do, and what all of the members of CCL do, is we try to develop a respectful, long-term relationship with members of Congress and their staffs, and just keep saying that respectfully the same concerns and try to bring up things like, change 1% doctrine, that, there's a risk here. Are you certain that there's no risk at all? And if we have a solution that doesn't cost anything, why are we not looking at it? There's some talk that we may get a trade-off with a tax package here. Nothing's come out publicly, but there is some chatter behind closed doors about using the carbon tax to come up with some of the revenues to help reduce corporate income. But we can't do anything about that stuff. It's there. Yes, sir.
Grant, go back to the no cost. You said it start at $10, go up by $10 per metric ton per year till 2030. That's $130 a metric ton. I don't know how much money that is. The mechanics of charging and collecting it. When someone tells me it doesn't cost anything, it does raise trust issues. Maybe not for everybody, but really, it seems like a leap in logic that there's no cost you could sell that.
Yeah, thank you. So, particularly, it's a trust issue for the right side of the aisle, no cost, proven to. It's a good question. I think that it's no macro cost. So when I say no macro cost, there's going to be costs embedded. Everything's going to go up in price. But the no macro cost addresses the fact or refers to the fact that we're going to have more jobs and GDP grows. So that the economy is better off and we have more jobs. In terms of the actual administration of it, there will be costs in administering it, which will be higher at a percentage basis in the earlier years than in the later years. And some of the studies I've seen show it being as much as 4 or 5% in the early years. And embedded in your question was another question, I think, is how much does it generate in revenues? By year 10, it's like $475 billion. Another context, at $40 a ton of CO2, that's the equivalent of 36 cents a gallon of gas. And that generates $2,000 a year in dividends to a typical family. Yes, sir.
I've given up on preventing or even reversing global temperature change. If we put out all the fires today, the temperature would keep going up for 50 years because of CO2 in the atmosphere now. Instead, we have to begin preparing now while things are prosperous and adapt for the inevitable changes. And that does not seem to be part of the lobbying thinking.
So, not opposed to it at all. I think that we should be doing that as well. I'm just advocating. So one of the things you can imagine is you're trying to organize, educate, direct, support 85,000 volunteers. You want to have a clean, simple message that you can create elevator pitches on, and you can help people who don't know anything about science, economics, to help them sort of learn and deal with it. So it's a very focused, simple, consistent message. Having said that, we don't stand opposed to anything. We're not opposed to nuclear. We're not opposed to fracking. We're not opposed to, let the economics sort themselves out. So mitigation and planning would be what a WISE group would also do. So we're not saying this should be done instead of. But I think that the thing that I really like about this, as opposed to, say, cap and trade, or certainly regulations, is this is a way for us to, if we get bipartisan support, it could be a systemic shift and accelerate the move away from fossil fuels, but in a gradual way. And you're right about global warming. It's going to keep going even if we don't pump anything else out there. But what can you do? Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering with, reaching out to Republicans, some of the new Republicans are not necessarily fiscally conservative anymore. So do you have to adjust your message when you're talking to folks that don't really care about fiscal conservatism? Like, how do you pitch this to them?
Well, I think when you're pitching anything to anybody, the very first thing you do is you listen to where they are.
Right.
And so you find, and you want to take the time to develop that relationship. So what are their concerns? And where can you find a resonance in the concerns they do have with trying to advance this? And there are some people who aren't there. They don't care, or there are other things that are more important to them. And I think, as all of you probably know, there are parts of the globe that will be better off with global warming. Not a lot, but some people will benefit. So, yes, sir.
I was going to ask, wouldn't it be better to put the time and energy that's going into, slamming on the brakes to avoiding the accident, or at least preparing for it, as he was suggesting? Meaning, if we're, just at this point, going to add another ounce of brake fluid to stop, that might stop it a little bit. but it's, in terms of the bigger picture, it's not nearly as important in terms of consequences for the species as preparing for the inevitable.
Yes, I agree, but I don't know what that, I don't have a policy. I'm a simple guy. I need to know what I can do. I need to have something that's attainable and have a path that I can advance. And were something like that to show up that looked like it might get something done, I'd be happy to get on board. I just don't see it. So this is I think a great plan, but it's also the best one that I can find. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I would add to that, so at least from my impression of the climate caucus, a lot of the Republicans that joined that are ones that are in Florida or places where along the coast where they may be actually seeing impacts. And so you can tie to that, consequences, things that are coming, planning, that kind of stuff to this. So I don't see, I guess I don't have a question there, but I was gonna say, I don't see a conflict in.
Yeah, they're not mutually
Doing that
exclusive.
and then-
They're not mutually exclusive at all. And the caucus, by the way, although we were instrumental in providing the grassroots impetus to get Republicans to join with Democrats, it isn't created to support our plan. It's created to do something about climate, which could be mitigation, adaptation, and reduction in terms of the contribution, continuing to add greenhouse gases. So it's sort of all of the above. Yes, sir.
So I have a question about how you message about a particular challenge that elected officials seem to face. So I think that the most prominent example is Bob Inglis, who has talked about the opposition from a very small fraction of his Republican constituents. So, and he sort of conveyed that this is actually really widespread, that among Republican elected officials, it's not sort of what the average person believes, who might actually be quite reasonable with respect to climate change, but a very, very small fraction who turns out in the primaries and the people who sort of rile them up. So how do you alleviate those kind of concerns about really the primary election process and how that is steering away from the broader concerns of constituencies?
Thank you. So what I can tell you is that my own personal experience, all of my caucus members, and we have a Republican lobbyist that we've since hired this year who knows all the Republican offices. There's not a single Republican office behind closed doors that doesn't acknowledge that global warming is an issue. Not a single one anymore. The debate's about how much, not whether, but how much man's contributing. But I come back to when I was talking about the loud versus the quiet and the tribal control. That this has worked. This is a way to rally your troops. To your point, you get the radical people out there, and folks in the middle that just let's just get government functioning. They don't know where to go. There's no path for them. And the other thing I would just sort of add to that is when we have these conversations behind closed doors, primarily with Republicans, it's not unusual to have the conversation we had with the senator, which was, I hear you, I get it, it makes sense. But when I step outside that closed door, this is what he said, when I stepped outside that closed door, who's standing beside me and where's my air cover? Mm-hmm. So the party's stuck in this problem right now, and it's, with recent events I'm sure you read about, Corker and Flake, McCain, and this whole thing there's lots happening. It's a very dynamic situation right now. I don't know where it settles. It's discomforting, but we got it's a challenge. But behind closed doors, there's resonance.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a way of responding to that particular concern, where they might say, well, 10% of the people in my district are going to turn out to vote,
So the way we try to respond is we try to get more members. We try to be there, and when they have a town hall meeting, we show up at those town hall meetings. But we're not shouters. That's not how we show up. So, but we can try to calm things, we try to be a presence. So we get people out. So it's the grassroots efforts that help support folks like Flake. I mean, sadly, he's not running again. Yes, ma'am.
With that, I forget who said it, but recently someone said that there will be no, like, to your point, where at the end of the day, they're actually there to keep their job. Like, their main job is to keep their job in some sense. So when they have challengers from the left or the right, that's really motivating them. And someone, I was asking if someone said a statement that I can't remember who, that until there's political pain inflicted on Republicans for not doing something by their constituents, they won't do anything. Do you think that's true? Or that seems like a harsh thing, and I don't remember who said it, but.
Thank you, because I want to put a positive spin on what you just said. Think about it this way. I've met many people in Congress and many staff members, and every single one of them, like everyone in this room, has an ego. Every single one of them has some sense of desire for control and power, and they like money because they got to pay bills, and so they got a lot going on because they're people. But the positive spin I would put on that in terms of keeping their job is, think about it this way. If and every one of them has an aspect of this too, how large it is relative to the ego and the power and everything else depends on the individual, but they're actually there for public service. And if you really care about veterans, if you really care about education, or you really care about infrastructure, or you're really trying to save the jobs in your dying factory towns, if you don't get reelected, you can't do anything about that. So yes, it's about keeping my job, but it's about keeping my job so I can continue to serve. So that's I think a lot of us want to just yell at them and get mad at them.
I didn't mean to be pejorative about that, because having been a former staffer, like, it's actually good that they want to keep their job because they have to listen to their voters to do that. I was thinking more of the having to inflict pain on them to get them to do something in terms of politically.
Well,
I don't know.
The pain they're feeling is from the right more than the left.
Yeah.
And so you see what that consequence is. One of the messages that we try to tell people on both sides, it resonates more with Republicans because they're like, really? Is we'll say to someone, and this will come from someone who's very progressive, is, I don't want you out of the office. I want you to be in office. I want to make sure you stay in office until you can help us get something done on this issue. It's such a different story from, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to get, it's tough. Yeah.
One of the points you had on this element of a successful plan is continued or increased U.S. leadership outside of an international agreement. I was just curious if you expand upon your thoughts on the usefulness or I think you said it's not possible to have a functioning, effective international agreement. So I was curious of your thoughts, and also if the lobby addresses that issue of international cooperation as an element to a solution.
It would be nice. I'm not, we have come out saying, our national leadership has come out saying that we should stay in the Paris Accord, and so I got to tell you, my own view is, I don't know what that does. Why? Because of all the games that other countries can play, and it doesn't really enforce anything, I don't think. I'm an economics guy, I'm a finance guy, I don't put the price in. And if we can do this, then we don't have to worry about trying to negotiate whether it's bilateral or multilateral or get the UN involved. We just do it. We import so much and we export so much, they're going to follow. And China can follow us, India can follow us. If they don't, then we'll collect the revenues that they could have collected to do with whatever they wanted to in their own country. On the price of CO2. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit more about the outreach efforts of CCO? And does it, for example, include teaching kids to advocate or lobby? Does it include the arts as well as, is it, like, what are the techniques of this?
So this is an outreach. So we address Rotaries. We'll talk to churches. And we really try to encourage kids. So our membership profile is typically someone who's retired, because it takes a lot of time to do this. And if you're retired, you can afford the time and the trips. But we also have a lot of younger engaged people too, and children thereof. And so one of our We had a very effective speaker who was 15 or something, amazing gal. And we try to take kids with us when we're lobbying. So we haven't done very much of this sort of presentation in school. And maybe we should. I mean, if the opportunity came, someone would do it.
And how about the arts?
Arts, I think, Max and the greenhouse, inside the greenhouse efforts, those are things that I'm happy to see going on, but that's not something we do. I mean, this wasn't really artistic today. Yes, sir.
This is a
If I can just
realization,
interject too, this will have to be the last question.
Okay.
a realization of something which might very well be true. That lower level elections, or at the state level, House primaries and so forth, are understandably localized geographically. It's probably true that the higher you go up the ladder of elections, the longer the time horizon becomes. Local things are mostly short-term things. That's a guess. But by looking at what is said, perhaps some analysis of this better responsibility over time as elections become more important might be true.
Well, I think that's why the House of Representatives gets re-elected every 2 years.
That's correct.
It's not really working so well right now.
But often they get re-elected.
Well, that's what I said, they get re-elected every 2 years.
But yet the Senate is elected.
Well, thank you for the questions, and thanks for showing up and staying.
Thank you very much for your